Hi, folks. Welcome to one more Hangout from B.net. So, if you're new to this Hangouts, we call it as Wednesday Hangouts. It's just an initiative from Bangalore .net user group, or B.net as we are known. Just a small initiative where we try to bring in a speaker every week and every Wednesday at 9 p.m. India Standard Time till 10 p.m. India Standard Time. We let the speaker, take a very specific topic, not a breadth wise but rather the depth wise, and then spend 60 minutes on that topic, and then kind of give you a dose of technology while you are having your dinner maybe. So today I have with me Vidyavrat Agarwal. He's a fellow MVP with me. He's a Microsoft MVP. He's also, as you can see, he's also a C Sharp Corner MVP. C Sharp Corner is another pretty large community of .NET developers. So, we're happy to have Vidya today with us, and then hope you guys will enjoy this particular hangout from us. So, Vidya, over to you.
Thanks, Lohit. Hello, friends. This is Vidyavrat Agarwal, as Lohit has mentioned, and I will be walking you through today with a topic about using test-driven development using C Sharp. I will be going through the PowerPoint at a very easy pace. I also have a demo to demonstrate the concepts in real using Visual Studio 2012. And if you are watching it live with us, keep logging your questions, and I would like to answer all the questions as much as possible. On this front page, which is right in front of you, my social coordinates are there. Feel free to reach out to me or to Lohit after this session if you have any more questions for me, and I would love to answer all of those. So let's begin with this topic, which is InsideOut TDD using C Sharp. So let's set up the agenda first, that what all we are going to cover today. So first I will give you a little bit introduction about myself. Then we will be understanding and adaptation concepts for test-driven development. Before you really start working on it, someone has to understand what are the benefits of it. Then we will talk about system under test. And then we will learn more about what exactly we are going to test. And before you start writing tests, we need to understand what are the properties of a good unit test. And then we will discover the structure. And then we will do all these things in real in Visual Studio using C Sharp. So let's go over it. So this is about me a little bit. So my name is Vidyavrat Agarwal. I have over 14 years experience. I work as a .NET consultant, and at the moment I am in Seattle, Washington, United States. I have almost many certifications from Microsoft. I am also a certified Scrum Master, and I am also certified from IIT for Oracle. But I am mainly a Microsoft person. So these are some of the books I have published. No big deal, you can see it from my websites as well. These are the books I did technical review. So that's it all little bit about me, so you know the speaker better, who the person is. Let's dive into the topic. That's all what we are here for. So first thing is understanding and adapting test-driven development. Now this slide will primarily focus on the concept that why somebody needs to understand TDD and why we have to adapt it if you really wish to, and who are the right people who are going behind it. So let's understand that. Now TDD is a very famous term today. Many companies are working on it. And this term is most commonly used among the teams who are really practicing agile methodology. Now, I have worked with so many production development teams, and production development teams which are really working on some products, not just a project kind of thing. Those teams are so critical that they want to make sure that whatever they are building is well tested. It really achieves the acceptance criteria, and they have to really heavily depend upon unit tests and to some extent integration tests, which dev and tests are writing together. So the key here for test-driven development is that it is the best methodology to build, the strong and quality-sensitive, quality-based applications using TDD. Again, TDD stands for test-driven development. Now, TDD is, as I said, an evolutionary approach. And what happens inside that, you are writing your tests as you are coding your development code. Normally, If you look at any other life cycle like waterfall or spiral, whatever your company or you are following, normally what happens, developers have the freedom to bake their entire developer code in their branch. And after that, if they wish, they can write some tests or they test it in their own way, maybe manual or semi automatic, and then they pass it on to a QA team. And QA team works on those executables or binaries using some tools, whatever, and then they test it. The key concept in TDD is that developers are responsible to write tests and as early as possible. That is one. Number two is, if not as early as possible, at least they need to write test immediately they finish a functionality. So if you are implementing some code, you are doing some business validation, some conditional logic, the moment you finish one condition, you need to write an adjacent unit test for that, which will satisfy the need of having a parallel adjacent unit test for that particular small piece of functionality. And that is what exactly the definition of a unit test is. Now let's look into the diagrammatic way that what exactly is the workflow of test-driven development. Here, this is a very simple diagram here I am showing. What happens normally, you add a test based on a functionality which you are going to write or you have written. You execute the test. Most of the time, I have seen test will fail, and that's the purpose what we want. Your test has to fail because you have not yet implemented the function. And since you have not yet implemented and your test failed, you need to make sure that you write only that much sufficient functionality in your development code that your test starts passing. So you make a little change, you run the test again. If it fails, that means there is still a room of refactoring and modifying your development code. You have not written the functionality well enough. Whereas if it passes, then you are good to go. Move on, add another test, and then let it either fail or let it pass. So basically your entire development cycle, which developers are coding in code editor window, that whole functionality is now driven by tests. And at the end, when you are finished coding and you are ready to hand it over to QA or maybe give it directly to production, you are sure that you have covered all the acceptance criteria, all the use cases, all the most possible scenarios which your functionality requires. I will be talking about these things in coming slides, so stay tuned and feel free to ask your questions or put it in the question answer window we have. Now, what are the benefits of test-driven development? To some extent, I have kind of walked you through already what are the benefits, but here I will go through again in a more religious fashion. So number one, TDD gives an opportunity to think as user of your code instead of an implementer of dev code. The normal philosophy, if someone is not coming from a TDD, test-driven development background, what happens? Most of the development community is only an implementer. They only implement the code. They do not have that much good testing mindset, or they don't want to test, or their company is not following that practice. But things are changing now. You are as equally responsible to test your own code as a QA team member is. So if you fix your code with tests while you are coding, there are more chances that you will have no bugs at all or no issues at all. Now, TDD gives an opportunity to think as a user of your code instead of an implementer of dev code. Means you are not only coding, you are also testing it. Now, what happens if we move on here?
Hey Vidya, we have a question. Do you want to take it now? It's
Yes,
very
yes, please.
appropriate to this particular scenario that you're saying. So the question is TDD for writing test cases or is it a design approach?
It is basically an approach which helps you design your application by writing test cases. So I'm going to cover that thing now in this slide where I'm talking about benefits of TDD. So to mention it again, what happens when you are designing your application, what are the driving factor for that? So that factor can be achieved by using TDD. So you know in what direction you are going, and your test cases will help you design your application in a better way. So let me finish this slide, and I will take that further if needed. So as I said, TDD is like you think as a user, not just only as an implementer. It helps you reduce bugs because you are identifying all the case scenarios ahead of time, and that reflect the intent of user and what actually application needs or demands. So once you are following TDD, you spend less and less time on debugging, because I have seen myself when working on waterfall methodology that devs normally code things, it handed over to QA, and then QA finds some bugs which developers have missed to some extent. That happens very often. So you spend less and less time on debugging because your code is really, bug proof, I would say, to some extent. Now, avoid collateral damage. In testing world, collateral damage is a term which means it happens very often in the teams which we are working these days. Like you have parallel check-ins happening, multiple devs are checking out files and checking in. What happened in collateral damage is that you fixed something in such a way that it started breaking something else, and knowingly or unknowingly. You did not assume that that thing will happen, but it starts happening. Now, if you have good unit tests written as your test suite, what happens is you can do a regression test, you can run all the tests, and you can figure out that whatever I'm designing, whatever I'm creating is not breaking anything in the entire environment. So that is another way to figure out one functionality, whether small or large, has not broken anything which was working fine previously. Next thing is it helps you achieve YAGNI. YAGNI is an acronym for you are not gonna need it. So basically what happens here, when we design applications, we think of so many validations, conditions, and various things. Many times we have some code which is never touched, or some conditions, some flows, some conditional logic which is never touched by most of the scenarios. And that is, or many times we do big designing upfront, which we don't need. So for big designing upfront, there is a term called BDUF. So concept is that you have to avoid big design upfront, and that is what another concept of agile. And that's why agile teams are going with TDD, because it helps you achieve YAGNI, which means you are not going to need it. And it saves you from writing code which you actually don't need. So until you reach to the point you need it, you are not writing it ahead of time, because there is no driving factor for your code functionality. Now, in TDD or in any test environment, you have to understand the concept that what is SUT. Sometimes people pronounce it as SUT, and it stands for System Under Test. System under test means what exactly you are going to test by writing unit tests for code accuracy, and you are going to cover the possible scenarios which might possibly break the functionality at runtime, or if not, they may not produce either legitimate results or may throw some exceptions or runtime errors. So your system under test is basically nothing more than the code which a developer is writing. And how do you write tests around it? How do you wrap it with tests around it to make sure that functionality is achieved and nothing is broken? Now, assuming you are working on a bank application, I have created something, and your code possibly look like something this. So you have an account class where you have a variable called account balance. You have something called account status, which is false. And then you have some roles, user, manager. You have functions for balance, deposit, withdrawal, blah, blah, blah. Here, I'm going to take a very small section, and then we will do TDD around it. So the section which I'm going to cover is to verify if account is active. based on I'm passing an account number. So if you see here, this is account active method, which is a Boolean type and returning the account status. This method we are going to put under test-driven development, and we will see how we work in real-world scenarios for that. So let's take it from here. Now, before we really start writing tests, we have to really understand that what exactly are we going to test? If you are not an agile team 100% and you are moving towards agile, then these days teams are becoming very smart and intelligent, asking right questions to the product owners, which is an agile scrum term to some extent. By product owner means people who are responsible for functionality. Maybe you're a business analyst or maybe some technical fellow in your team. You have to ask what exactly are we going to verify? Your validations, your rules, business rules, all these things you need to understand upfront. So most critical and common areas for unit testing can be categorized under boundary tests and error conditions. Most of the time I have seen boundary test and error conditions are accomplished by developers in some conditional logic when either a QA member throws it out or business analyst pops in and say, oh, you know what, we missed this thing. So what happens here using TDD, what we do, we proactively think of all these things and we write test cases around it and we keep testing again and again to make sure that nothing is broken and we are really meeting the acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria is again an agile term, but it can be used commonly for other work items as well if you are not agile team, because acceptance criteria means a criteria which is defined to make sure that your functionality which you coded will be accepted after implementation. So let's talk a little bit more about these things. Boundary conditions are anything which you can think of like missing or empty or missing values. To some extent, it could be your validation rules as well, that you are not supposed to miss something. It has to have a value in it. Inappropriate values, which are not realistic from business point of view, such as a person's age cannot be -1 or 0 or maybe 200 years or so. Date of birth, it cannot be tomorrow's date or it cannot be a time in future. For example, somebody can be born just now, I mean just now, but that time has to be whatever is in the clock right now. It cannot be a future time unless you are punching it in that particular 1 second or 1 minute ahead of it. Now, duplicates in a list. For example, you are working on a data structure, you are doing something in a code. Let's say you are populating a list object and something's not supposed to be a duplicate. So these are some conditions which you can think of. Now, password is same as either first name or last name. Special characters or case-related conditions. You are not allowing some special cases characters. Types of acceptable values in a field. Example, a name cannot hold numeric and age cannot hold characters, for example. A range is another critical thing. Let's say you are passing some values. Some range is required. Let's say your age range, your salary income range, and what range you have to fall into. So all these things can be considered as boundary conditions. Error conditions are very critical. Many times I have seen that developers are normally very smart when they are coding. They proactively think of writing a lot of defensive mechanism. They put a lot of safety net around their code. But at times I have also seen that we put a lot of extra code which is not required. And that is what I meant in the previous slide about avoiding big design upfront or achieving Yagni. You are not going to need it. What happens, you are doing something and one of the QA went into your system and that person reads an acceptance criteria and said, okay, how about this? If I pass no value, what happens? And your system throws some sort of exception at runtime or some error happens, which you did not anticipate or you did not visualize. And then you say, okay, no worries, log the bug, show me the stack trace and I will fix it. Those issues are very common. And very commonly it happens when QA team starts working on it because they are supposed to break your application, right? So we have to think of error conditions, and error conditions are mostly exceptions. So think of argument exceptions, Think of like divide by zero exception is the most common thing if you are doing any mathematical calculation. Consider a scenario of access denied if you are working on file handling especially. And this scenario happens most commonly when you are writing into a file which is open for read or vice versa. Now, null reference exception is the most common exception thrown very vaguely from the system many times. And you have to check for existence, assuming that this path is right, whatever I am coding or where I am looking for the file, that path may not be right, something might be missing. So make sure you cover, you code around assuming or proactively thinking of error conditions your application might throw, and then you design it accordingly. So file not found exception, directory not found exception, or similar things. So this is what exactly you have to most commonly think of while you are writing an application. Now, moving on, after understanding all these things, how do we accomplish TDD? Again, it's a simple thing. TDD is nothing more than writing unit tests around your functionality. So basically, you are wrapping your functionality with test cases, and only those test cases which are meeting the criteria of your functionality. So here are some of the properties of a good unit test must have in general. So firstly, unit tests has to be automatic. In definition, a unit test is a small piece of code which exercises a small functionality which you are writing in your development code. And what it does, it only verifies the results which are really needed for that particular small piece of development code only. One unit test is not going to test end-to-end scenario. It will test only one particular piece of logic. If it is testing end-to-end, you are going more towards integration testing. And that is not what TDD says. Now, another thing is your tests has to be thorough. By thorough does not mean that you go end to end or you start touching other functionality. Thorough means you need to test all the possible areas of functionality which is subject to failure due to incorrect input or some unforeseen conditions. Let's say in some scenario it can throw an exception or something can go wrong. So assume those things and then you proactively design it. Unit tests are supposed to be repeatable. Repeatable means, if you remember earlier I said that your tests has to make sure that there is no collateral damage. How do you verify there is no collateral damage? The technique for that is once a team has written a test suite of unit tests or a unit test suite, what happens, team runs it daily. That thing becomes part of your daily build system, your continuous integration system. And what happens, the moment there is a check-in, automatically entire unit test suite will be kicked off. And after that build, if there is any unit test failing, you are responsible to fix it because you broke the unit test. And that's why the best practice says that tests has to be repeatable in such a way that if I am a dev and I'm working on something and I touched the area where I break your unit test, now it is my responsibility to fix your unit test as well. It's not yours anymore because I am the one who broke it. And that's real. I'm talking in real life scenarios here. So what happens if I'm not able to fix it, I am allowed to ask you for help. Say, hey, you know what did you do? I'm not getting it. And then take your help and fix it. But yes, since I'm the dev who broke it, due to my check-in it is breaking, the functionality I'm implementing, you are whole sole owner to fix that unit test. When agile teams work, what they do, they run all the possible unit tests which might impact the functionality or run the entire test suite to make sure no unit test is failing. Because that is touching, if you see the beauty, that is touching hundreds of pain points in your system, small areas, and verifying that nothing is broken by my code which I just implemented. Once everything is green, then only they go ahead and check in. That's why repeatable is the key here. Your tests has to be repeatable. You can run it 100 times, 1,000 times, million times, and they have to produce exact same result each similar time. Now, next property is independent. I kind of covered it a couple of times already, but I want to make sure you understand it so well. Independent means each unit test is independent of another test. That's the key. And that's why I was enforcing a lot just a minute ago that if you break something, you make sure you fix it. Ideally, in real world scenarios, that is a very rare case that your code will break something. But at times, let's say you are working on a task and that task needs you to change some function signatures or do something similar. You are doing some refactoring thing. Your task needs that. Now, there are some tests written, and those tests are not ready to accept that new parameter which you added because you are not passing null or anything, or you did not give it, you did not define also as an optional parameter. I hope you understand what I'm talking now, right? Now, if you haven't defined it as an optional, and if it is not optional, you did not pass null for that. If it accepts it, then all your tests are bound to fail because they are plugged with the same function signature. You are passing a new DLL that goes in the reference. It starts looking for the new function signatures all of a sudden, and all the tests say, you know what, we are not getting that parameter, and everything starts failing. Think like that. Now, who is going to fix it? So when you are working on such scenarios and you are giving your estimation that I'm going to give you estimation how long I'm going to take to fix this whole functionality, think of such scenarios. These are out of the box situations. And if your team is really not 100% TDD, I would say, but you guys are writing unit tests, think of such scenarios. Do not forget to estimate fixing unit tests as well. Many times developer ignore unit tests. They do not estimate well for these tests. And when your unit test fails, you are in trouble because you have caused collateral damage. Your change, which was actually a task, and that task has initiated or triggered the collateral damage. So you need to focus on small aspects of big functionality. Make sure that unit tests are not failing, and if they are failing, you discover it and you fix it in the development code, rerun the tests, and then only you check in. Professional. I'm sure everybody is a good developer. They write very clean code, well-structured code with good comments in and out, using right data structures and all. Same thing goes with unit tests. Many times I have seen people write unit tests in a very ugly way. They do not follow the same coding practice which they have followed for their development code. At the end, always remember, unit testing is developer's tool. It's not a tool for QA. Always remember that. And a developer has to take pride in writing even unit tests because that also reflects how good developer you are. So even though you are writing unit tests, which could be a 1 or 2 line or maybe 3, 4, 5 line maximum maybe, still write it with the same motivation, same enthusiasm, and the same approach you have been following for your development code. If needed, comment it. If needed, structure it well. If needed, design it well and use it the right way. So be as good developer as you are, even when you are writing unit tests, because again, I will repeat it, unit test is a developer's tool. Always remember that. It's not a QA team job. And when the teams I have worked with, teams even review the unit tests. By review means code review. Even though it's one line of code, doesn't matter. A code is a code, and it has to go through the whole process, which is written by professionals and reviewed by professionals and delivered in a professional way. So properties of a unit test: automatic, thorough, repeatable, independent, and professional. Moving on. How do you structure a unit test? It's a very simple thing. Only 3 words you need to remember. You have to arrange it. Arrange means you set up the conditions needed for testing, means you create your objects, initialize some variables maybe if needed, or line up the resources you may require. Let's say you are setting up a file path, you are giving some file path variable. Arranging means nothing more than arranging the environment so your test can run. Act. Act means you are invoking the method which you are trying to test and to which you will be passing some possible parameters and values. And then assert. Assert is a unit testing term. It doesn't matter which unit test framework you are using, NUnit, Microsoft Test Framework, XUnit, or there are many more in industry today. Assert is the class which almost every single unit test framework implements. And what assert does, it asserts your conditions and gives you the result based on the conditions. So we will see some of these in our code scenario today. So arrange, act, and assert. In some scenarios, you may not need all three. I will cover both the scenarios where you need all three and a scenario where you don't need all three. So we will move on and I will demonstrate that. So this is a demo time now, and I will shift you guys from this window to my dev code window. Before we do that, let's see if there is any question answer, anything for me.
There are two questions. Do you want to take it now?
I'm reading it. Is this TDD approach more suitable for production development rather than service-based projects? And Pabitra Mohan Rai asked that question. This is a very intelligent question. Now, let me tell you this. What happens, it depends. To, to be accurate and to give you a real world answer, production teams are more behind TDD, not the service-based projects. If you are writing some product, then you have to be, but even if you happen to be in a service industry, you are working for an offshore team or a proper service type company, and you are still working on a product, then you might want to implement or go through TDD approach. So I wanted to clarify that service-based industry and service-based project are two different things. So I hope I answered that. If not, Pabitra, please reach out to me, or either to me or to Lohit later on, or I will take it afterwards. Anubhav Ranjan asked another question: is it better to take the test cases from the QA as well and consider them in design and development phases? Excellent question. Both the questions are very appropriate, and I really appreciate it. It's so very well asked. Now, I had that point, but due to time limitation, I removed that particular text from my slide. But I will be publishing an article, and you can follow me on my Facebook page, and you will be in touch what I'm doing. Now, anyways, to answering to the question right away, what happens? What Anubhav is pointing to basically, I see that question coming from two points, two ways. One is, since we are developers, we may not understand what exactly customer mindset is, what are the acceptance criteria, what are the case scenarios where my environment or testing can fail. So I have seen sometimes testers are very reluctant, and I'm talking in real, okay? Testers are very reluctant to give you their test scenarios because to some extent, you are not letting them file any bug against you. But the teams I have worked with, and many teams are following their practice where dev and test gel together. You go to business, you understand the requirement, and dev and test sit together, and they think of test cases together. They brainstorm on it. And then dev only code the unit test, and tester thinks of more of an integration and end-to-end tests or regression tests, a load or performance, those sort of things. But dev and test mingle together, what Anubhav is mentioning here, and they really, think of test cases and then they code it in the unit tests. So this is a very valid scenario. If you can do it, that will be an awesome thing. But I don't know how many companies really allow that due to time constraint or whatever. But I have been into this thing, and I have done that with a couple of teams where as a developer and tester, they go together and they think of test cases together. I hope I answered your question to some extent. I will keep checking it in. Let's move on to some demo thing real quick, and keep logging your question. Okay, there is one more. Is TDD approach more suitable for? No, that is done.
No, don't worry. I'm just selecting it and then marking it done so that
Oh,
we
okay.
clear
All
the
right. All right.
stuff.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I will move on while Lohit is doing that in the background. I will increase the font size a little bit, not too much, so you guys can focus. So if you recall from my slide, I talked about something called system under test. And there I was talking about this particular method here. Is account active? And what it is doing, it is just returning account status. Plain, blunt return. That's it. Now if you see, how do we initialize things? You initialize it to, either default values or something which you are not sure, then you leave it default. For Boolean, by default is false. In a banking system, when you pass an account number here, at line number 20, when you pass a valid account number, you are expected to return true because that account is active. But here I am just returning account status because I am going to approach test-driven development. So what I do, I leave this code as it is, which is bare minimum implementation. If you see, everything is bare minimum implementation. I hope you are able to follow. Everything is bare minimum implementation. I'm not doing any checking like what if account number is null? What if I do not pass valid account number? What if I pass amount, withdrawal amount is $0 or 0 rupees? What if I pass my user role as a user and I say activate my account? Can I do that? No, you cannot. You are a user. Only manager can do it, right? And that's why I have put here an enum for roles customer and manager. Now, just I hope you are able to visualize the scenario. I mean, the direction I am trying to come from and help you implement this whole thing. Now, for this demo purpose, I will only implement this thing to walk you through the TDD, but you can have your own system and you can deep dive into that and really deliver it to the 100% TDD for all the methods and functions we have. Let's move on to the TDD thing. So what happens for that? You have to add a test project in your solution. Many times since I'm here, I like to talk a little bit about design approaches and help you achieve productivity within your teams. And when you are talking to your managers, maybe you can suggest some ideas. That is always good if needed. Many times team thinks, is it good to have a separate project in a different solution? Or can I have my unit test, means my test-driven test suite in the same solution where I am writing my development code? For productivity point of view, I would recommend you should have your unit tests within your development solution. The reason is when you check it in, it goes as a single binary, as a whole package of binaries which your continuous integration can pick, number one. Number two, when you are working as a developer, you are not shifting or jumping from two different solutions time to time, and you can really debug it well, and you can be more productive when you are in the same solution. So in my teams where we work, we try to have unit tests in the same solution, but other integration tests, load tests, performance tests, end-to-end tests, and various other type of tests, we have a totally separate solution where we build different projects for each different type of tests. But unit tests go in the developer's project only. Now here, let's open this unit test 1.cs file where I have already put some stub to save some time here and really talk more about things and take your questions further. I'm going very easy and slow to help you understand. Here, this is basically the unit test framework of Microsoft. As you can see, it's Microsoft Visual Studio Test Tool.unit testing. Here, I have added the reference of my DLL. Since I coded the functionality as DLL, so I added the reference of bank application, as you can see. This is the most common thing you need to do. After adding that DLL, what I am going to do is I'm going to start creating my unit tests. Now here, the attribute for a unit test is test method, and I gave it a priority as 0. You can give priorities like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's up to you, but I think these are priority 0 tests. Reason why we give priorities, in most of the teams, when you are working on a unit test, you meet a functionality where it is still throwing an error for some corner case scenario, and your QA is really screaming a lot about that, and you go in a bug triage meeting and you say, okay, you know what, I am working on 2 different tasks, either I fix it or I fix that. You choose. I have only limited time. In that case, team can decide, okay, we mark that bug as by design, since it is priority 2 or priority 3 or priority 4 bug, it's a corner case scenario, and hence you don't fix it. But if it is priority 0 bug, no matter what, you sit day and night, you have to fix it. So when you sit with your tester or when you are thinking by yourself from a test mindset, try to prioritize bugs. That if this issue fails tomorrow, what is the priority for that? And most of the build suites, I mean continuous integration and all, they normally pick priority test cases like 0 and 1 and 2. They don't pick most of the time 3 and 4. Otherwise, your build takes so long because hundreds of tons of test cases are running in the background. So there are various approaches and importance of this priority thing. Now here, the method name of your test method has to be some extent intuitive as much as possible. I have seen these names even in my team where I work. I'm working on a telecom domain these days. So what happens is we have very lengthy name, very lengthy. Let it be. That doesn't matter. Don't call it XYZ, ABC, 123, because later on even you will forget it. And even, as I said earlier, professional. Remember the property of a good unit test is professional. So how do you name your variables? You don't name your variables XYZ, 123, right? So same way, don't name it in a vague way. Name it in a proper fashion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test account status. I'm going to test if it is active. And if it is active, I want a success to be returned. I hope you understand. I will repeat it one more time how I break it. I'm going to test account status. So I call it test account status. I'm going to test if my account is active. Remember, account status is checking if it is active or not. And I am expecting success from here. So what did I do? I am arranging it. What arrange is? Arrange is setting the stage that you can kick off unit testing for that particular object which you got. You invoke the functionality out of it. And I'm acting on it. What is your act? I am acting that I am having a bool variable and I call it actual result. Entire testing industry depend on two words, expected and actual. These are the two words which define entire test industry today. All QA talks only these two terms, and same devs has to talk. When you are testing, you work on actual and expected. Now, actual result is something which you don't know because that is returned to you from the object when you invoke isAccountActive function by passing a parameter to it. And here I pass just 1, 2, 3, 4 for now. And what I am expecting that it shows me actual result which is true, and hence I am saying assert dot is true. If you can see, assert is a class inside your unit testing namespace, and what it does, it verifies conditions. If you remember, I spoke earlier in my previous slides about it, and here I am verifying that it has to be true. I hope everybody understands it. Once again, have a real quick look, a glance. This is my method. This is my system under test right now, a component in system under test. It is returning just account status. There is nothing. Plain blunt return. And here I arranged, I acted, and I am asserting. All right. So this is what I was talking about, professional. See how simple this unit test is. But still, I took enough care of naming my objects, giving the variable names, invoking the functionality, and this thing here, this method accepts an overload that you can pass a string to it, and this string will only be returned when this test case will fail. Means I'm expecting true. But if this actual result comes as a false, then you will see this string as an error, that what actually happened. Whereas if it returns you true and you are expecting true, then this error message is omitted or ignored. You won't see it. So I hope you understand. Learning assert is not a big deal. It's so simple. Most of the teams I have worked with, they use only 3, 4 varieties of assert. So either .r equal or is true. I have an article on unit testing. You can go to my website, and in my tag cloud, you can search for unit testing or search for unit testing, and you will find article over there. So let's move on. Let's build it real quick. So this builds, and let's hover my mouse on this test case itself and say right click and say run tests. So I'm running it. Just for your knowledge, I am in Visual Studio 2012. Approach remains the same even if you are in. So if you see here in Test Explorer, my test case failed. And the reason it failed is because here, if you see, it says account is not active. And if you recall, just a minute ago, what we discussed is that it says failed account is not active. And that thing came because I gave it as an overload here. So what happens? This test failed. And that is what driving you towards to implement your method in such a way that it stops failing. And that is how testing will drive your designing. Normally, teams do what? They implement the whole functionality, all if, else, exception checking, everything is done in the code. Then they come and then they think, okay, for which condition, what unit test I need to write? They do the other way around. Means your development is driving the testing, which normally happens if you see in normal teams. You develop, you hand it over to QA, and then your development is driving the testing. And then they come up with bugs or issues, then you implement it back. Here we are putting things right. We are saying, okay, let's do one thing. Let's avoid Yagni. Let's not do big design upfront. Let's think of user scenarios ahead of time. Let's think of those scenarios which we don't need. I hope you guys have heard a term called code coverage. So code coverage is used only for this purpose, that how much extra code we have written in development, that is one. And second, that whatever code we have written in development, is it really well tested? Is it really being hit by all unit tests? So all these things, I'm giving you some pointers for further learning if you wish to, like code coverage and all these things. So you can learn about these things. Now, in this, there is nothing you can do right now. Test failed. What I have to do is I have to make this test pass. And what do I do? To do that, we have to go to our development code and we have to implement functionality. What actually happened? I passed an account number, but it failed. Why? Because it is returning false. So what I do here, I come to my development code and I say if account number not equal to null. We are keeping it very simple, okay? I am saying account status equal to true, right? Else, I am saying account status equal to false. Make sense? So if you recall, in my unit test, I passed a value, means I passed a value, and this thing is failing. So I'm checking if it is not null. This is a very basic, the safety net people put around it. And let's go back and let's rerun the test this time. And if you see, test passed, right? Test passed because what I did, I am checking if it is not null, then pass it. What's wrong? So this thing is done, okay? Now let's see how we evolve around it. Now there is another exception. There is another test case I have, which is covering the concept of exception is thrown if null is passed as an account number. Now see how we are evolving, right? See, here I am only checking if it is not null, then do this thing. Otherwise, set it false. But how are you checking what if null is passed? In this case, your BA and your QA and you came to a conclusion that let's do one thing, let's throw an exception. That what your UI needs to catch and handle the null exception, right? So what I do here, I already have a test stub ready for that, to save some time as we are, I think, running a little bit late. So anyways, we will be able to cover it. Now here, again, it's a priority 0 test. And what I'm doing, I'm expecting an exception. See here, the attribute expected exception of type argument exception. This is completely under your control. Whatever type you want, you give it that type. So if you are willing to throw argument exception, give it argument exception. If you are willing to throw file not found exception, give it file not found exception. So you are the one who will be actually throwing it from your development code, right? We do try, catch, finally throw. So here you will be throwing and your test will be looking for it. So in test, you don't catch. In test, you expect. And what I'm expecting an exception of argument exception type. So here I'm saying arrange, again act, and I passed null here, right? Make sense? And this time, let's save it. Let's build it. And then I hover my mouse on this test method where I'm expecting an exception and you run the test. But what actually happened? If you see, what happened? One test case passed, success one, and this argument exception success, this thing failed. Why I'm calling it success? Means it is successful to raise argument exception. That's why name is like that. So I click on it, and if you observe here, what it is saying an exception was expected by attribute, and that thing didn't happen. Means, see this thing? Did not throw an exception. You see this line here? Means it was expecting an exception, but it did not throw. What is wrong then? We need to implement it, right? So I go back to my dev code here, and I say, okay, if this is the case, then what do? I say else if, I say string dot, here I pick is null or white space for now, and I pass it account number. So I'm saying if it is null or you pass white space, then let me do this. Then you throw new argument exception and say account number can't be null, right? And you say else let me do that real quick here, setting it to false. Right? So my code now is covering the concept of verifying that if I have null or not. So I'm saying if it is null or white space, then throw an argument exception, right? So I save that, I build it, and then I go back to my unit tests and I right click and I say run test and go to Team Explorer. And as you can see, this test is passing. If I say run all, always do run all because I had one, then I have added two. So click on run all and both the tests are passing. That means this change has not broken the previous test case, right? So whenever you, that is what I'm verifying, the collateral damage. So once you modify something, test often and test early. So you should keep testing. It doesn't matter because it takes only a few milliseconds. Now, this is done. Let's have one more scenario here real quick. I have one more situation. Exception is thrown if white space is passed as an account number. So what I did, I have a test stub ready for that. Let's uncomment this whole thing. And here, what I do, I am verifying that if I pass this white space as a parameter, then it should throw an exception, right? We already have, remember that we coded already, this thing is null or white space. Make sense? I hope you guys are following along. So if I pass white space, it will come here and it will throw an argument exception. Now what I do, I save it, I build it because I am assuming that I'm covered all the grounds and I hand it over to QA. And exception should be thrown, right? And I build it and let's run this case here and say run tests. If you see, this white space success, this thing failed. And it says the same thing. An exception was expected and your exception was not thrown. So basically what I did, I passed white space, which is covered over here is null or white space, but it did not throw. So there is some logical issue it seems. So let's see how do we handle that. It is time to learn debugging tests. It is very easy. Now I put a breakpoint here. Let's see what is happening and how do we evolve and remove the extra code and make sure everything is working fine. So I right click and I say debug tests. So I'm here. I am pressing F11 to step into is account active in object account. And I'm here right now. See my account number? Account number is a white space, which is covered right here. See this? In else condition. Now I'm stepping over. I'm pressing F10, not equal to null. That's okay. Let's see what happens. F10 seems it's going inside. See, it is going inside because first condition is not equal to null. And when you pass a white space, it's not null. That's why the second condition is never being touched. And that's why exception is not thrown. So this is kind of a logical, issue. Many times it happens. It's a very common thing. Now it is returning the status and you are bound to receive a failed test case. So means we observe what is happening, and it's another opportunity to go and refactor our development code. So we go back here and it looks like we don't need this thing. And if I comment it out for now and I say if it is this, then do this, otherwise set account status to true then. And how if after that we just return the account status and we build it and we have a unit test suite here. Let's remove breakpoint for now, save it, go to Test Explorer and say run all. You see, all three test cases passed. One is where you are verifying account status by passing the account number. Second, you are verifying that if you do not pass, if you pass null, here the name is a little bit wrong. I should have mentioned null somewhere. Now, if you pass null, you should receive an argument exception and it should be returning success for the test case point of view. Another one is if you pass white space, then it throws an argument exception and you get success. So all three test cases passed. Now this is how you avoided any such extra null checks or whatever. Now assume you need to check what if, like most of the, like in India especially, bank account numbers are minimum 12 digits. In United States here, account numbers are usually small. They are not that big. They have 7, 8 digits in that. So if you have to put some range in that, then you keep adding those conditions and keep testing. You add a new test, you write the code, refactor this whole isAccountActive function further, add new conditions, logical checks, blah, 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 test the method, and before you move any further, make sure you run all the tests. Why do we run all the tests? Because it is very important to make sure that you are not causing any collateral damage. Always remember that word. Collateral damage means a damage caused to a related or unrelated area knowingly or unknowingly, right? So this is all about test-driven development. And so we finished demo. Is there any more questions we have, Lohit?
Yeah, we have one. This is a good one. How do I test nested methods? Are nested methods be avoided in TDD?
Usually what we do not test nested methods kind of thing, because if you have such scenarios, you are going more towards integration test kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the only question we have. I think this is a pretty tricky thing to understand in TDD. Girish, I mean Girish is the person who asked this question. So in my basically in the TDD world, what we tend to call this is like setting expectations. So the nested methods, if you have, is like an expectation on the system under test. For example, the function that Vidya had used, where it checks whether the account status is active or not. That function is the primary, system which is under the test. But if it is relying on some other, let's say, a utility method, dart, something, some function, so that's like an expectation. So what you would say is, hey, my system under test may have an expectation on this particular method. So when that particular method is called, I want you to just say true or false or some value.
Right.
So you're
Correct.
just trying to set an expectation saying like, if my nested method returns true, what should my system under test do? If my nested method sends like a negative value or a false or whatever it is, what should my system under test do? So your focus while writing TDD is not to test your nested methods, rather to test your system under test and react to those values that are coming from your nested methods. Of course, you should typically have test cases for your method, whatever nested method you're called. They should the
Right.
those
Agree.
nested methods should be made system under test, and then write your test cases or whatever it is. So
Exactly.
that's how usually the TDD works. So I hope
Exactly.
we were
And
able to
your
clear your
nested
doubt.
method, right? And just to mention the same thing again, what Lohit just said, your nested method is another member
Yeah,
of test-driven development,
correct.
because that is very critical, because you are using that in various other method. That means, so if that thing fails, your entire system under test will fail. So you have a lot of dependency on other things.
I think that's all we have as
So
of
are
now.
we on time?
Oh yeah, we're on time. Don't
Okay,
worry about
cool.
the time.
So thank you
So
very much, guys.
yep.
Appreciate your time, and thank you very much, and keep learning.
Do you want to
And
just post your coordinates again? Maybe your first slide that you had where people can ping you, so that I think this video will be seen after the live events too. And then if they want to catch, yeah, there you go.
sure.
So
So this is
that's
my website. You can reach out to me on my website via my Facebook page, or you can reach me at Twitter as well.
There's one more question. It just came in. So can TD be used in applications where part of the code is not written by me or my team, like in parallel development scenario?
Okay. Now, no. What this gentleman is asking, or this person is asking, that is, if you are doing parallel development, if you know the functionality, and okay, let me put it this way. There are two ways to answer it. This is a very interesting question, and I would like to answer that for sure. Now, I don't know what exactly you are trying to say, but there are two ways you might be coming from. In parallel development, what happens? I am the one who is writing the DLL. Okay, just take my case only if you have been watching it. Now, I am writing the DLL for bank application, and you are the one who is writing unit test suite. Think like that. Now, this is parallel development, right? Now, can you do it? Yes, you can start writing unit tests, because you have been pairing or gelling with dev and SDET people or test people, QA. You come up with all the test cases already. While I am all my heads down into baking the DLL, you are working, with full energy on writing unit tests, and nothing more than test stubs. You are defining parameters, what will you pass, and blah blah blah. And as of now, all your tests are going to fail because there is nothing. You cannot run it, but you have been coding all the test stubs of different varieties. That is one. You can do that. Another thing, another parallel development is that your team is working on some business logic layer, data access layer, some web service, some service bus, implementing some complicated piece of code, and which is not going to be ready anytime soon. But you are in the phase where you have to write some integration tests kind of thing. Then Microsoft fakes come into the picture. So fakes is something that you don't have something concrete in hand, and you can fake it that as you have it in real. For example, sending email. You need SMTP and all these things. You are not sending email in real, or your email functionality is not yet ready, but you can fake it. So fake itself is a topic in itself. So I would not like to talk in detail about it, but I think the way I anticipated and I I thought that the direction you might be coming from, I tried to answer it from both the ways. And if Lohit has more inputs to that, Lohit, over to you.
Yeah, I think the question is like, part of the code is not written by me or my team. Yeah, it depends on like, there's team one, team two, team three, whatever it is. But if you are team one and then you're trying to use a code used by team two, a perfect situation where you don't know how those guys have implemented it, so you don't need to know. But what you can always do is, yes, you are in a contract with them saying like, okay, here is my interface that you should expect that I will be coding against. And if
Exactly.
you know those contracts, you can always write a better test because you don't know what they're implementation is. So you can actually write all the boundary conditions. You can actually go and then actually crash that particular DLL or whatever you're trying to use it by passing all boundary conditions possible, all those things. This brings me to let you know that Microsoft Research had came out with a project known as I believe it's known as PEX.
Yep.
PEX. It was a tremendously beautiful research
Yeah,
product.
that was
Yeah.
good. They tried to replace moles, but the
Yes,
thing is that PAX doesn't work with Visual Studio 2012
I know.
and on. It is only good on up to 2010,
Yeah,
and
so I
many
think
pieces
they
are
they kind of
behind
abandoned
actually.
it in the middle, but I
Exactly.
loved it.
That was
Basically,
amazing. I
yeah,
loved that.
Anubhav,
I loved
just
that.
to let you know, if you want to go ahead and then read this, yeah, there is something called as specs. As Vidya said, it may not work with 2013 or 2012, but it works with 2010. But the concept was super simple. All
Yeah.
you need to do was to tell PEX that, hey, here is my method, and then this
Yeah.
would go out and then bring out all possible combinations
Correct.
of parameters that you would expect in your method, and then it would give you the test cases saying like, hey, you know what? These are the 12 test cases possible for your method, and your code runs for 10 of them. 12, the 11 and 12 fail. So typical usage was, let's say, Vidya was showing a function where there's a string being passed. I loved PEX because PEX is the only framework that I have seen which used to pass backslash zero or backslash
Exactly. Right.
r
Right. Right.
backslash n backslash t. How many would have thought about that particular
Right.
use
Right.
case, right? I can pass a
True.
tab because it's a string.
True.
So yeah, so if you, to your question, coming back to your question, you can always write it because you just need to know what is the system under test. If you're thinking like, okay, I should be getting back a boolean when I pass a string, yeah, you can always do a boundary conditions for that, like string. I can pass an empty, I can pass a null, I can pass whatever, but I should be getting back the right answer. So you can actually write it. It's just the mindset. You just have to change the mindset and then get deep into TDD. That's all I can say about that.
All right. So just to for people who just heard that term PAX, it spells as letter P, P as in Paul, E as in England, X as in Xmas.
Yep.
So it's PAX. If you will do Bing and you will say codeplex space PAX, you will be able to find first link in Bing.
True. I'm a binger, so that's good you said bing. you know
No, I do. This is the second time you mentioned that. So
yeah. So
yeah,
thank you very much, Vidya. It was a pretty good, interesting start for people who would like to get on TDD and they wanted to know what is TDD. So I think this would give them a pretty good theory as well as a little kickstart to their coding experiences on the TDD. We hope people who's going to watch it, if they have any question, they're going to ping you, or always you can come back to b.net, bangalore.net on Facebook. It's facebook.com/groups/bdotnet, and then you can be the member there. Just pass post a question, and then we have a lot of people waiting to answer that. So hope today's 1 hour was well spent, and thanks Vidya, especially because there's a time zone difference today. Vidya has to get back to his office now, so thank you very much for taking time and then presenting. We look forward
not a
to have
problem.
you maybe in the future, so thank you
Sure.
once again.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Keep learning. Thanks, Lohit.